A billionaire just took her deaf daughter to a Christmas dinner to save her image, but she's about to lose her soul. When the power goes out, the only person who can communicate with the terrified child is the janitor she just fired. But why does a man working for minimum wage speak the most elite language of the heart? The answer involves a hidden bank account, a diamond theft, and a betrayal so cold it'll make your blood boil. You won't believe the choice she makes when she realizes the villain in the room is actually the only one trying to save her. If this story resonates with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, Lucas and I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The Ashford Plaza Grand Ballroom was a cathedral of glass and gold, suffocatingly bright with the glow of 10,000 Christmas lights. For Lucas Bennett, the beauty of the room was secondary to the ache in his lower back and the grease under his fingernails. He stood atop a ladder, his 5'9" frame balanced precariously as he adjusted a faulty chandelier segment. He had been working for 14 hours straight. Every extra hour meant a better Christmas for his daughter, Sophie, maybe even that violin she'd been eyeing in the window of the pawn shop. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Celine Ashford swept in, a vision of sharp edges and expensive silk. Her long hair was pinned back with a diamond clip that cost more than Lucas's annual salary. Behind her, a small, ethereal girl of about 7 followed like a shadow. This was Mila. She wore a velvet dress, but her eyes were fixed on the floor, her hands twisting nervously at her sides. "I don't care about the logistics, Julian," Celine's voice rang out, cold and precise as a scalpel. She was speaking to a man in a 3-piece suit who followed her like a hungry wolf. Julian Vesper, the senior VP, smirked. "The merger is safe, Celine, but the optics—" Julian paused, his eyes landing on the ladder in the middle of the aisle. "What is this? This man is still here?" Lucas began to climb down, his movements calm and dignified despite the sudden scrutiny. "Just finishing the wiring, sir. It'll be clear in 2 minutes." Julian didn't look at Lucas. He looked through him as if he were a piece of faulty furniture. 2 minutes is 2 minutes too long. This is a $5,000 a plate dinner. Look at you. You're covered in soot and sweat. You're an eyesore. Lucas reached the floor, wiping his hands on a rag. "I apologize for the timing. I was told the gala prep had an extension." "Don't talk back to me," Julian snapped. He reached out and snatched the heavy toolbox Lucas was holding. "And don't bring your filth near the guests." With a casual, cruel flick of his wrist, he tipped the toolbox over. Steel wrenches, screws, and delicate electrical components crashed on the polished marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. One heavy driver skidded across the floor, narrowly missing Mila's shoes. The young girl jumped, her eyes wide with terror. She couldn't hear the crash, but she could feel the venom in the room. "Clean it up," Julian sneered, stepping on a copper connector with his polished leather shoe, crushing it. "On your hands and knees. And when you're done, use the service entrance. You don't belong in the same air as Miss Ashford." Celine didn't stop him. She was already back on her phone, her thumb flying across the screen. She glanced at Lucas for a fleeting second, not with cruelty, but with a chilling indifference that hurt worse. To her, he wasn't a man, he was a delay. Lucas felt the heat rise in his neck, his fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. He thought of Sophie waiting at home. He thought of the rent. He slowly lowered himself to the cold marble, beginning to pick up the scattered pieces of his livelihood while the elite of the city watched from the periphery. Have you ever been treated as invisible or less than human because of the job you do? How would you have reacted if someone humiliated you in front of a child? Lucas worked in silence, his fingers nimble despite the sting of Julian's insult. He didn't look up, but he felt a small, still presence hovering near him. He glanced to his right. Mila was standing just inches away, her head tilted, watching him gather the fallen screws. Her eyes weren't filled with the judgment of the adults. They were filled with a profound, lonely curiosity. Celine was 20 feet away, her back turned as she barked orders at a catering manager. She hadn't noticed her daughter drift away.
Lucas saw a small silver hearing aid tucked behind Mila's ear, partially hidden by her hair. He felt a familiar pang in his chest. He reached for a small brass gear that had rolled under a buffet table. As he pulled it out, he caught Mila's eye. Slowly, deliberately, he tucked the gear into his palm and made it disappear, then pulled it from behind her ear. Mila's face transformed. A tiny, gasping laugh escaped her, a sound of pure surprise. Lucas didn't stop there. He set the tool down and lifted his hands. With fluid, graceful movements, he began to sign. "Hello, my name is Lucas. Are you okay?" Mila froze. Her entire body went rigid, her eyes widening until they looked like glass marbles. No one in her mother's world ever spoke to her like this. They spoke at her, or they spoke to her tutors, or they simply shouted as if volume could bridge the gap of silence. Her small hands trembled as she signed back, her movements hesitant and rusty. "You talk hand language?" "Yes," Lucas signed, a warm, genuine smile breaking through his rugged exterior. "My daughter, Sophie, is like you. She is my world. I learned so I could hear her heart." Mila's eyes welled with tears. She took a step closer, the heavy velvet of her dress rustling. For a moment, the cold, cavernous ballroom disappeared. There was just a man on the floor and a girl who had finally found a bridge to the shore. "Mila!" The voice was like a whip. Celine had turned around, her face pale with a mix of shock and instinctive protective fury. She marched over, her heels clicking like a countdown. She snatched Mila's hand, pulling her back. "What are you doing?" Celine demanded, her eyes darting between the greasy maintenance man and her daughter. "Did he touch you? Did he say something to you?" "I was just," Lucas began, standing up. "I didn't ask you," Celine snapped, her voice low and dangerous. She looked at Mila, who was frantically trying to sign to her mother. Her hands were a blur of motion, trying to explain that this man was a friend, that he knew the secret language. But Celine didn't understand. She looked at her small hands moving with a flash of what looked like shame. "Stop that, Mila. Not here. Not in front of these people. Use your voice or be quiet." Mila's hands dropped, the light in her eyes extinguished instantly. Lucas felt a roar of protective anger, not for himself, but for the girl. He knew the secret identity he carried wasn't wealth or a title. It was the ability to see what Celine was choosing to ignore. "She was just saying she liked the magic trick, Miss Ashford," Lucas said, his voice level and resonant. "She has a beautiful way of expressing herself. You should try listening sometime." Celine recoiled as if he had slapped her. "You are a technician, Mr. Whatever your name is. My daughter's education is handled by the best specialists in the country. Finish your work and leave." She turned and walked away, dragging Mila behind her. But as she went, Lucas noticed something Julian had missed. Julian was huddled in a corner with a rival developer, exchanging a thumb drive and whispering with a look of predatory triumph. Lucas realized then that the security breach Julian had mocked him for earlier wasn't about the tools. It was a cover for something much darker happening within Celine's own company.
The gala was in full swing, a whirlwind of clinking crystal and forced laughter. Lucas was supposed to have vanished through the service exit, but a faulty circuit breaker in the basement, the one Julian had stepped on earlier, began to hiss. Lucas knew the building's old pulse better than anyone. If he left now, the entire Christmas miracle theme Celine had spent millions on would go dark. He stayed, hidden in the shadows of the tech booth, monitoring the straining wires. On the main stage, Celine stood under a spotlight, the epitome of power. She was moments away from signing the merger documents that would cement her legacy. Mila sat at a front-row table, surrounded by strangers in tuxedos, looking like a porcelain doll left on a shelf. Suddenly, the air grew heavy with the smell of ozone. Pop, pop, pop. The magnificent chandeliers flickered and died. A thick, acrid smoke began to curl from the vents. A deliberate overload triggered by a remote bypass Julian had slipped into the system. The crowd gasped, then panicked. In the sudden darkness, the emergency strobes began to flash, sharp, rhythmic bursts of blinding white light.
For the hearing guests, it was a confusing inconvenience. For Mila, it was a nightmare. Without sound to contextualize the chaos, the flashing lights and the vibrations of hundreds of feet running for the exits felt like the world was tearing apart. She scrambled under the table, her hands over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut, screaming a silent, terrified plea. "Mila!" Soline shouted from the stage, her composure shattered. She leaped down, stumbling in her heels, tripping over a discarded silk wrap. "Mila, where are you?" Soline reached the table where her daughter had been, but the girl was gone. In the flickering strobe light, the ballroom was a shifting labyrinth of shadows. Soline's voice was lost in the din of the crowd. She realized, with a soul-crushing weight, that even if she screamed until her lungs bled, Mila couldn't hear her. The distance between them wasn't just physical, it was the vast, silent ocean Soline had refused to cross. "I can't find her," Soline cried out, her billionaire armor finally cracking. "I can't see her!" "Get back, Soline. The fire department is on the way," Julian shouted, feigning concern while ushering the board members toward the door, ensuring the disaster was witnessed by everyone. Then a steady hand caught Soline's shoulder. It wasn't Julian. It was the man from the floor, Lucas. "She's not by the exits," Lucas said, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. He had a heavy-duty flashlight in one hand and a radio in the other. "She'll be looking for somewhere small, somewhere the vibrations stop." "Please," Soline gasped, clutching his arm. She didn't care about his soot-stained shirt now. She didn't care about the merger. "She's terrified of the lights. I don't know how to tell her I'm here." "I do," Lucas said firmly. "Stay behind me." He led her not toward the screaming crowds, but toward the heavy velvet curtains behind the buffet line. He moved with a quiet, tactical precision, his eyes scanning the floor. He saw a small, glittery shoe peeking out from behind a massive ice sculpture of a reindeer. Lucas knelt. He didn't grab her. He didn't startle her. He placed the flashlight on the floor, pointing it at the wall so it created a soft, steady glow instead of the terrifying strobes. Then he reached out and gently tapped the floor in a specific rhythm, 3 slow beats. Mila's head popped out from behind the ice. Her face was streaked with tears, her chest heaving. Lucas didn't use a voice. He lifted his hands into the soft light and signed with a slow, rhythmic grace. "I am here. Your mother is here. You are safe. The lights are just playing a game." Mila let out a sob that broke the silence of the corner. She flew out from her hiding spot, but she didn't run to Soline. She threw her arms around Lucas's neck, clinging to the man who knew how to find her in the dark. The chaos of the ballroom was replaced by the low hum of a space heater in Lucas's modest 2-bedroom apartment. Soline sat on the edge of a faded corduroy sofa, her $5,000 silk dress looking alien against the backdrop of peeling wallpaper and mismatched bookshelves. She held a chipped mug of lukewarm cocoa as if it were a priceless artifact. Across the room, the contrast was devastating. Lucas was sitting on the floor, his work jacket tossed aside to reveal the rugged build of a man who worked with his hands. He was flanked by 2 girls. Sophie, Lucas's daughter, was tiny and radiant, her dark curls bouncing as she animatedly signed to Mila. Mila, who usually stood like a frozen statue in Soline's presence, was transformed. She was messy. She had cocoa on her upper lip. She was laughing, a silent, joyful vibration that shook her shoulders as Sophie showed her a 3-legged teddy bear. "She's never done that," Soline whispered, her voice cracking. "She's never just played." "It's because she doesn't have to perform here," Lucas said gently, drying a dish with a worn towel. "In this house, silence isn't a void. It's just another way to be together." Soline looked around the cramped space.
There was a small plastic Christmas tree in the corner, decorated with popcorn strings and hand-painted ornaments. It was objectively pathetic compared to the 30-foot spruce in her lobby, yet the room felt heavy with a warmth she couldn't buy. She realized that while she had been building a financial empire for Mila's future, she had left her daughter's present completely empty. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Celine said, looking at her manicured hands. "The best doctors, the best schools. I thought if I made enough money, I could protect her from a world that wouldn't understand her." "You can't buy your way into her world, Celine," Lucas said, sitting on the arm of the sofa. He didn't look like a maintenance worker anymore. He looked like a man who possessed a secret wealth she would never understand. You have to walk into it. You have to learn the language of her heart, not just the language of your boardrooms. Celine watched Lucas's daughter lean over and kiss Mila's cheek. The connection was effortless, rooted in shared identity and a father who had made sure his child never felt broken. Celine felt a profound inadequacy wash over her. She was a titan of industry, but in this small, drafty apartment, she was the poorest person in the room. If you had to choose between a life of luxury where you were misunderstood or a life of struggle where you were truly seen and loved, which would you pick? Is professional success ever worth the cost of a parent-child bond?
The soft clicking of the radiator was the only sound as the two girls fell asleep on the rug, curled together like sisters. Celine stood by the small, crowded mantel, her eyes landing on a weathered wooden frame. It was a photo of a woman with the same radiant smile as Sophie, standing in a field of sunflowers. "She has her mother's eyes," Celine said softly, her fingers hovering over the glass, but not touching it. Lucas stepped up beside her, the scent of cedar and old machinery clinging to him. Maya was a special education teacher. She spent her life giving voices to children the world had forgotten. He paused, his gaze distant. When Sophie was 3, she contracted a severe viral meningitis. We almost lost her. She survived, but the fever took her hearing. Maya died 6 months later in a car accident on her way back from a charity drive. Celine's breath hitched. "I'm so sorry, Lucas." "I spent a year in a dark room, Celine. I blamed God, I blamed the road, I blamed myself for not being the one in the car," Lucas said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "But then I looked at Sophie. She was screaming in a world she couldn't hear anymore, and I realized I was letting her drown in silence because I was too busy drowning in my own grief. I sold everything. I took every job, janitor, mechanic, electrician, just to pay for her therapy and to learn how to speak with my hands. I realized that Sophie didn't need a rich father. She needed a father who was present." Celine turned to him, the flickering orange glow of the plastic Christmas tree casting shadows across her face. "My parents, they didn't believe in presence. They believed in position. When I was Mila's age, I came home with a drawing I'd spent a week on. My father looked at it for 2 seconds and asked why I wasn't practicing my French instead. He told me that emotion was a liability in the Ashford family." She looked over at Mila, sleeping soundly. "When Mila was born deaf, I felt a failure, like I'd produced something imperfect in a world that demands perfection. I treated her like a business problem to be solved with the best tutors and the most expensive equipment. I thought if I made her normal, I would finally be a good mother." "She doesn't want to be normal, Celine," Lucas said, his hand accidentally brushing hers as he reached for the photo. He didn't pull away. "She just wants to be heard." The subtext between them shifted. In the silence of the apartment, the billionaire and the maintenance worker weren't rivals or strangers. They were two broken parents looking for a way back to their children. Celine felt a warmth she hadn't known in decades, not from the heater, but from the raw, unfiltered honesty of a man who had nothing to hide.
The next morning, the harsh winter sun spilled through the cracked window of the kitchen, turning the steam from the kettle into golden mist. Celine had stayed, not because she had to, but because for the first time in 10 years, she didn't want to be anywhere else. She watched Lucas move through the kitchen with a quiet, rhythmic efficiency. He wasn't barking orders or checking a watch. He was simply being. He was making pancakes, the scent of vanilla and sizzling batter filling the small space. "I can't remember the last time I didn't have a breakfast meeting," Celine admitted, leaning against the laminate counter. She had rolled up the sleeves of her silk blouse, her expensive watch sitting on the windowsill next to a plastic bottle of dish soap. "The world won't stop spinning because you took a Saturday morning for yourself, Celine," Lucas said, flipping a golden pancake with a flick of his wrist. Mila and Sophie burst into the kitchen, their faces glowing. The barrier between them had completely dissolved. They were mid-conversation in sign language, their hands dancing so fast Celine couldn't keep up. Mila looked at her mother and signed something. "What did she say?" asked Celine, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lucas smiled. "She asked if you can stay and help us fix Barnaby." He pointed to the 3-legged teddy bear sitting on the table. For the next hour, the billionaire executive was tasked with the most important project of her career, limb reattachment. Lucas sat across from her, showing her how to thread a needle, a skill she hadn't used since she was a girl. Their knees brushed under the small table, and for the first time, Celine didn't pull away. "You're a natural," Lucas joked, as Celine struggled with a knot, "though your stitches are a bit corporate, very tight." Celine laughed, a real, uninhibited sound that made Mila stop and stare. "I'm a perfectionist, Lucas. It's a curse." "It's only a curse if you use it to hide," Lucas said softly. He reached out, his hand covering hers to steady the thread. His skin was warm and rough, a sharp contrast to the cold glass and steel of her daily life. For a moment, the air between them hummed with a different kind of electricity than the faulty wiring at the plaza. There was no talk of mergers, no stock prices, no Julian. There was just the sound of children laughing and the quiet intimacy of two people rebuilding something broken. Celine looked at Lucas, really looked at him, and saw a man who was stronger than any CEO she had ever met. He didn't need a skyscraper to be tall. "I don't want to go back," Celine whispered, her eyes meeting his, "to the way it was." "Then don't. Build something new." It was a moment of perfect peace, the calm before the inevitable storm. Celine felt a terrifying, beautiful hope blooming in her chest, unaware that back at the Ashford Plaza, Julian Vesper was currently handing a folder of evidence to the board of directors, preparing to burn her world to the ground. The bubble of peace didn't just pop, it was incinerated. 2 hours later, Celine's private driver arrived at Lucas's apartment, but he wasn't alone. Julian Vesper stepped out of the black sedan, his face a mask of faux sympathy. Behind him stood 2 grim-faced men from Ashford Security. "Celine, thank God you're safe," Julian said, his voice dripping with a poison he called concern. "We've been looking for you everywhere. We found the source of the accident at the gala." Celine stepped out onto the sidewalk, her protective walls sliding back into place as she felt the eyes of her security team on her. "What are you talking about, Julian?" Julian held up a tablet, playing a grainy loop of security footage. It showed Lucas in the dark tech booth during the gala, his hands moving over the wires just seconds before the lights failed. "Our forensic IT team found a remote bypass installed on the primary circuit. And look at this." He swiped to a photo of a bank transfer record.
a series of anonymous deposits into an account linked to a Lucas Bennett over the last 6 months. It seems our hero maintenance worker was paid to stage the disaster so he could save the billionaire's daughter and worm his way into your life. Celine felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the screen, then at the apartment door where Lucas was standing, holding Mila's hand. "That's not possible," Celine whispered, but the seed of doubt, the old corporate paranoia she'd lived with for years, began to sprout. She had been burned before. Every person who had ever approached her wanted a piece of the Ashford empire. Was Lucas just the most talented actor of them all? "There's more," hissed Julian, stepping closer. "We searched his locker at the plaza. We found your missing diamond clip, Celine, the one you lost during the chaos." One of the security guards stepped forward, holding up the diamond clip in a plastic evidence bag. It caught the winter sun, mocking her with its brilliance. Lucas stepped forward, his face pale but his jaw set. He didn't look at Julian, he looked at Celine. He saw the shift in her eyes, the way she pulled Mila closer to her side, away from him. "Celine, I don't know what he's showing you, but it's a lie," Lucas said, his voice steady but carrying a hint of a tremor. "The footage doesn't lie, Lucas," Celine said, her voice turning back into the ice he had worked so hard to melt. "The bank records don't lie. Did you target me? Did you know Mila was deaf before you ever found her in that corner?" "I didn't even know your name until you walked into that room," Lucas countered. "I was fixing the wires because Julian broke them." "A likely story from a man who can barely pay his rent," laughed Julian. "He's a professional, Celine, a gold digger who uses his own child as bait." That was the breaking point. Lucas's eyes flashed with a primal protective rage. He took a step towards Julian, but the security guards intercepted him, shoving him back against the brick wall of the apartment. Sophie let out a cry, her hands flying to her mouth in terror. "Stop it!" Celine screamed. She looked at Lucas, the man who had shown her how to talk to her daughter, and then at the evidence of a world that demanded she trust no one. "Just stay away from us. Julian, take us home." As the sedan pulled away, Lucas stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind biting at his face. He watched the car disappear, feeling the crushing weight of a betrayal he hadn't earned. He looked down at Sophie, who was signing frantically. Why did the lady leave? Why is she sad? Lucas didn't have the heart to tell her that in Celine's world, a diamond was worth more than the truth.
The boardroom of Ashford International was a tomb of glass and cold ambition. Celine sat at the head of the mahogany table, the merger documents laid out before her like a death warrant. Julian stood over her shoulder, a pen already uncapped. "Sign it, Celine," Julian urged, his voice a silk-wrapped threat. "The board is already nervous after the incident with that technician. Signing this now proves you've regained control. It proves you aren't distracted by sentimental liabilities." Celine looked at the pen. She felt hollow. Beside her, Mila sat in a high-backed leather chair, her small hands resting in her lap. The girl hadn't signed a single word since they left Lucas's apartment. She was back to being a ghost. Suddenly, the massive 100-inch telepresence screen at the end of the room flickered to life. It wasn't the projected growth charts. It was a video, low angle, shaky, but clear. It was the security footage from the Gala tech booth, but it wasn't the edited loop Julian had shown her. "What is this?" hissed Julian, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Security, shut it down." "Wait," commanded Celine, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. On the screen, the full footage played. It showed Julian entering the booth before Lucas arrived. It showed Julian intentionally fraying the wires and plugging in a black and red thumb drive, the same one Lucas had seen him with earlier. Most damningly, the audio picked up Julian whispering into his phone, "The bypass is set. When the lights go, the board will lose faith in Soline's safety protocols. I'll step in as the hero and we'll split the merger bonus. Just make sure the maintenance guy takes the fall." The room went deathly silent. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Julian Bennett stood there, flanked by a young tech-savvy security intern he had befriended weeks ago. Lucas wasn't wearing his grease-stained jumpsuit. He wore a clean, dark suit that sat well on his rugged frame. He looked every bit as powerful as the men at the table, not because of his clothes, but because of his truth. "The anonymous bank transfers Julian showed you," Lucas said, walking toward the table with measured steps, "they weren't to me. They were from Julian's offshore account to a shell company used to pay for the sabotage. My friend here just finished tracing the digital handshake." Julian lunged for the tablet, his composure finally shattering. "This is a fabrication. He's a thief. He stole the diamond clip." "I didn't steal it, Julian," Lucas said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small digital recorder. He pressed play. Julian's own voice filled the room. "I'll drop the diamond in his locker tonight. Once the police find it, Soline won't care about the footage. She's a sucker for betrayal. It's the only thing she understands." Soline stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. The shame she had felt earlier wasn't for Lucas, it was for herself. She had let her fear of vulnerability make her blind to the only honest man she had met in years. She turned to Julian, her eyes burning with a cold, righteous fury. "You didn't just try to steal my company, Julian. You tried to steal the only voice my daughter ever had." She looked at the head of security. "Take him out of my building. Call the police. I want every charge filed: sabotage, defamation, and corporate espionage." As Julian was dragged out screaming about his contribution to the firm, the room cleared. Soline stood across from Lucas. The silence between them was no longer a wall, it was a bridge. Mila stood up from her chair. She looked at Lucas, then at her mother. Slowly, tentatively, she lifted her hands. "Mom, is the bad man gone?" Soline didn't wait for a translator. She didn't look at Lucas for help. She looked directly into her daughter's eyes. She didn't know the signs yet, but she knew the heart. She pulled Mila into a fierce, protective embrace, her tears finally falling on the child's velvet shoulders. "He's gone, baby," Soline whispered into Mila's hair, knowing the girl could feel the vibration of her love. "He's never coming back." 1 week later, on Christmas evening, the world outside Lucas's small apartment was blanketed in a thick, hushed layer of snow. There were no flashing strobes or corporate cameras, only the soft, rhythmic blink of the colored lights on the plastic tree. A sharp, rhythmic knock sounded at the door. When Lucas opened it, he found Soline standing on the landing. She wasn't wearing her silk power suits or her diamond clips. She wore a heavy wool coat, a simple scarf, and a look of quiet humility that made her more beautiful than any gala gown ever could. Beside her, Mila stood holding a large rectangular case wrapped in bright red paper. "We didn't mean to intrude," Soline said, her breath hitching in the cold air. But Mila insisted on delivering this herself. Lucas stepped aside, ushering them into the warmth. Sophie came running out, and within seconds the two girls were huddled together on the rug. Mila handed the gift to Sophie. As the paper was torn away, Sophie's eyes went wide. It was the violin, the one from the pawn shop window, but brand new, its wood gleaming like polished honey. "Soline, this is too much," Lucas whispered, looking at the instrument. "It's not a gift from a billionaire, Lucas," Soline said, stepping closer. "It's a thank you from a mother. You didn't just save my company from Julian. You saved me from a life of silence." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound folder. "I've liquidated the merger bonus. I'm opening a community center in Sophie's neighborhood, a place for deaf children and their families to learn together for free. I want you to run the technical and vocational programs. No more double shifts in basements, Lucas. I need someone who knows the value of a person's light."
Lucas looked at the folder, then at the woman standing before him. The class tension that had once defined their every interaction had vanished. In its place was a deep, resonant respect. "I don't know what to say," Lucas admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Celine replied. She hesitated, then lifted her hands. Her movements were slow, her fingers slightly clumsy, but the effort was unmistakable. "I am learning. For her. For us." Mila let out a joyous squeal, throwing herself into her mother's arms. For the first time, Celine didn't just hold her, she communicated with her. As the snow fell softly outside the window, Lucas felt a sense of peace settle over his home. He had spent his life being invisible to the world, but in the eyes of the woman standing in his kitchen, he saw a future where he was finally seen. He reached out, taking Celine's hand in his, and this time she didn't just stay, she leaned in. The story of the billionaire and the maintenance worker didn't end with a signed contract or a stock price. It ended in the quiet, sacred space where two hearts finally spoke the same language. True wealth isn't found in a bank account or a title. It's found in the moment you realize someone truly understands you without a single word being spoken. If you had the chance to start over and build a life based on love rather than status, would you have the courage to take it? Let us know in the comments if you believe everyone deserves a second chance at connection. Thank you for watching another story of Lucas Bennett to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as wild and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So like the video and subscribe for more, because Lucas and I will be waiting for you tomorrow.